So today we're going to be doing different things with functions, and so right away, if you look at the top, it says given. So I have two functions. This is Frank function, so f of x is 0.8x, and this will change with each problem. It'll give you a new given, and then the other one is g of x, which is x minus 5, and we're going to do different things with these guys. So like number one, it is f of x plus g of x. So f of x up there gives us is 0.8x, and then we're adding to it g of x, and g of x in this case is x minus 5. All right, so what I'm going to do is just add like terms, and so my 0.8x can combine with, that's a 1x, so that's 1.8x, and then I just have that minus 5 at the end, so my final answer is that. Number two is just written a different way. It's the same thing as writing g of x minus f of x. So don't be confused by that notation. So now I am taking my g of x function, which is x minus 5, and I'm subtracting my f of x from it. So f of x was 0.8x. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to subtract like terms. And so 1x minus 0.8x is 0.2x, and then I have that minus 5 again off to the side. The next one, I'm taking f of x and I'm timesing it by g of x. So I'm taking 0.8x and I am multiplying times g of x, which is still x minus 5. Now, the rules of math say that I must distribute this 0.8x to both terms. So you 0.8x squared minus, and if you do 0.8 times 5 in your calculator, you would get 4x. That's your answer for that one. Number 4, I'm taking f of x and I'm dividing g of x. So I'm taking 0.8x and I am dividing my g of x, x minus 5. And so this one, you have to think back a couple units where you can only cancel things out if they are matching binomials or trinomials. And since we have a monomial up top and a binomial down bottom, that is my final answer. All right, 5 is a little bit different. F of 5, we should have done this in Algebra 1. All that's saying is it wants you to plug 5 into the f function. So once you take this 5 and plug it in for that x right there. So you have 0.8x, but instead of the x, you have a 5 there. And you can do that right on your calculator. So I just do 0.8 times 5, and you hit enter, and there's your answer. It's just 4. And then number 6 is doing the same thing, but you're plugging negative 2 into the g function. So I'm going to be doing x minus 5, but instead of x, I do negative 2 minus 5. Enter, and the answer is negative 7. Number 7, this time instead of a 5, I'm plugging a into f function. So I'm going to have 0.8, but instead of a 5 in there, I have an a in there. And since it's a letter, I can't do much with my calculator. I can just do 0.8 times a, which is 0.8a. For number 8, I'm doing g of 3x squared. So up here, again, I did negative 2 minus 5. That's how I got my answer. But instead of negative 2 this time, I have 3x squared minus 5. And again, I can't actually subtract those like I could in number 6, so that's just my final answer. Now we're going to get into something called composition of functions. And so this is what the bulk of our lesson is going to be on. It's creating a new function by substituting one function into another function in place of x. So there's two types of notation. The one is this first type, and the second one looks like it's saying fog. So these mean the same thing. They're just different notation. And all that's saying is that you're substituting g of x in for the x in f of x. So if you look at the given, I have two new givens. F of x is now x minus 3, and g of x is now changed to be x squared plus 4. And so the first one has that notation that I just talked about. And so we have learned in the previous page about how to just plug a number into f or a variable. So like we learned that we were plugging like 5 in, and you would just take that 5 and plug it in for the x. This time, however, what we're doing is we're plugging g of x in. And so if you notice the g of x that's inside of the parentheses right there. So we are now just going to take that g of x and plug it in for that x right there. So in place of the x, I'm going to write it out. In place of the x is going to be the x squared plus 4. So x squared plus 4 is in place of that x. And then I cannot forget about that minus 3 out back. Okay, so where the green is where the x used to be in f of x. And now I can just simplify it up by combining the 4 and the 3. So x squared 4 minus 3 is 1. So my final answer is x squared plus 1. So let me show you another one. This next one has that weird notation, so I suggest that you just rewrite it. So I write it in the order that's written, but I just replace it with parentheses. And then you can just ignore that original notation. I just like to show it to you because, again, you want to know it for the SOL. And so this time what I'm doing is, instead of plugging in a number or a variable in for g, what I'm doing is I'm plugging in f of x for it. And so f of x is x minus 3. So I'm taking that x minus 3 and I'm plugging it in to g, like this. And so I'm going to be taking that entire x plus 3, or x minus 3, and I'm plugging it in for the x right there. So it's going to look something like this. So I have my x minus 3, and then x squared plus 4. So where the yellow is where the x originally was in the g function, but I just replaced it with x minus 3. Normally we replaced it with a number or something in the last page, but this time I replaced it with x minus 3. And so how we would simplify that up is that since there's a square on the outside of this parenthesis, what I have to do off to the side is I have to FOIL it or use the box method. So I do x minus 3, x minus 3. So I have x squared in the first box, negative 3x in the second box, negative 3x, and positive 9. So I have x squared, I add the middle 2, I get negative 6x plus 9, and I can't forget that plus 4 that was originally there. Then I add together those, so I have x squared minus 6x, and then I add the 9 and the 4, and I get 13. And that is my final answer for this one. Number 3. So this time I have a number in it. So if I have a number in it, what I want to do is I want to plug that number into the inside function first. So I'm going to take that negative 2 and I'm going to plug it into my f function first. So I can use my calculator or my brain. I'm just doing negative 2 minus 3. And so negative 2 minus 3, using my brain, is negative 5. Now I'm going to take that negative 5 and I'm going to plug it into the g function. So I'm going to do negative 5 squared plus 4. Again, you can use your calculator or you can just use your brain. You would get 29 if you did that. And that's my final answer. And so that negative 5 that I got first isn't the final answer because then you have to plug it into the g function. So let's try another one. So for this one, the inside, I do the inside first. I have to plug 5 into g first. So I take that 5, I plug it in. So 5 squared plus 4. When I do 5 squared plus 4, I get 29. Now I'm going to take that 29 and I'm going to plug it into the f function. So 29 minus 3, and I get 26 as my answer. All right, let's do another one. This one is a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. And so for number 5, what I'm doing is I have f of g of x. So I'm plugging g of x into f of x. So my f of x and g of x have changed. So f of x is now 7x squared plus 4x minus 5. And my g of x is now x plus 2. So for number 1, I'm plugging g of x in for the f of x function. So I'm just going to rewrite my f or my g of x. So x plus 2. And I'm plugging that into the f function. So I am going to write out my f function. But instead of where the x's originally would go, so I'm going to just put a space in here with all the x's. So instead of x's, that's where the x's would go, I'm going to replace it with the green x plus 2, the g function. Now, there is a way to simplify this, but I am not going to waste time doing so. I'm not going to give you one that hard. I just think it shows very well what exactly we did. Number 6. Now, again, remember that is just the same thing as writing g of f of x. So you can just replace them like that so you can see it better. So now I'm plugging f of x in for g of x. So I'm going to write out my f of x function, and I'm plugging it in to g, so it'll look like that. And so I can write out my g function, but instead of that x, so where that x would usually go, so that's my g of x function, where that x would usually go, I'm going to put in the yellow function that's in the parentheses, and I made my parentheses a little too small, so it would be 7x squared plus 4x minus 5 would go in that tiny little parenthesis. And so then this one's not too hard to simplify. Between the parentheses and the 2, I can combine like terms. I can combine that 2 and that negative 5. And so my final answer would be 7x squared plus 4x minus 3. Number 7. So my inside function says f of negative 2, so I'm going to fill that in. So negative 2, I'm going to plug it into my f function. And so this one you'll definitely want to use a calculator for. When you plug it into the f function, you have to plug it in for both of those x's, there and there. So let me show you on the calculator how to do that. Okay. So I take 7, and in parentheses, because it's a negative number, negative 2, close the parentheses, then I square it, plus 4, in parentheses again, negative 2, close the parentheses, and then minus 5. So when I plug negative 2 into f, I get 15. So 15 is what I get when I plug it in for f. Now I need to plug that into g. And so that one's not too terrible to do. I'm going to be plugging in 15 plus 2, because I'm plugging into that g function, and I get 17 as my final answer. All right, the last one, I'm doing the inside first and filling in the inside, so g of 5. So I'm plugging 5 into the g function, so 5 plus 2, so f of 7. And now I'm going to plug 7 into the f function, which I'll do on my calculator. So I do 7 and then another 7 squared plus 4 times 7 minus 5. And I get my final answer of 366. That's my final answer. Tomorrow you'll be having one of the video quizzes. So giraffe is up there in the right-hand corner. That is the word that will be asked.